Hello, welcome back. We continue today's lecture. Hello, we continue today's lecture, given the fact that next week is your test, and we've also had, a week of not having a lecture. So I'm going to combine these two discussions. And what we discussed in the previous slide is about the general management and basically their functions, which we talked about the four main functions. And what this section basically seeks to do is to talk about the remaining sections. We are going to talk about the planning. So this presentation is on planning. This presentation is on planning. And at the end of this lecture, I expect you to be able to explain planning and its management function, the importance of it, the process, the interpret goals and the different organizational goals, the hierarchy of goals, difference between the strategic, the functional, and the operational planning, and also differentiate between strategic to accomplish different strategies to accomplish different goals. In the outline of this presentation, I'm going to be brief, and because I'm adding two lectures together, so this is the outline which I'm going to focus on. So what is planning? Now, planning, as we've discussed, is basically giving directions to a company, a business. If you want your business to support or if you want your business to thrive, you need to make sure that you have a stated vision, a goal, and have to have a mission, or have to have a system as to how to get these plans achieved, the goals that you set, how do you get them achieved? So what are the benefits and the costs of planning? Planning gives direction, as I said, in terms of what you want to do. You give a timeline as to what you intend to do. Planning also reduces the impact of change. You should be able to know the situations or the environmental changes that are happening. And with planning, it helps to reduce the risk that are coming from these changes. And also planning also helps to promote coordination in terms of the different departments and the different processes involved in businesses. How do you coordinate all this? How do you make sure that you bring all ideas and vision on board? It also ensures cohesion, that there's some form of, a flow of ideas, so that every department has its role, its vision, and what it intends to achieve, and that cohesion basically will help businesses grow. It also facilitates control. So once you have a system of visions outlined, it helps you to know how to control resources, the human resource, the financial resource, and how to make sure that you achieve the best benefit for the business. Planning can also be a cost. It can also have its other in terms of negative side. It's not just always positive. So what are these costs of planning? The cost of planning, as we are saying, it may create some form of rigidity. It may create some form of rigidity in the sense that companies are now forced to follow a plan. And in some situations, when the situation changes, when the environment changes, we need to be flexible. But because the company says that we need to follow this process, or start manufacturing at 8 o'clock, and maybe there was an incident at the company, and the company now needs to start at the later time, it affects the productivity of the company, because now people who are working at 8, and because maybe there was a fire incident or a situation at the business environment, they need to work from 8 to 2, and they started work around 12 o'clock because of the problem that happened. This rigidity that we are talking about is that now they will just work from 12 to 2, instead of maybe making it more flexible. So sometimes in terms of the development in the working space, we need to be a little bit flexible, and planning makes it very rigid, because that is what we have been told to do, and that is what people follow. Also, planning consumes management time. It takes time, valuable resources in terms of planning, because time is a resource. And if you are giving more time into planning, it's that timing could have maybe transformed into something more beneficial. We can also talk about formal plans may replace intuition and creativity. So whatever plan businesses set in terms of the goals or the visions that they state, we should know that in the near future, there should be some form of innovation instead of creativity. Now, if you just go by what is on the plan, you don't tend to think beyond the box. You don't go beyond what the status quo, and planning, limit that kind of innovative ideas. We can also talk about delays in decision making. So, for example, if you go to a workplace and you have told that you are supposed to start maybe the first production at 8 and close at 10, second production at 7 and at 12 and close at that. Maybe you finish the first one early, you could have continuously continue with the second, but because of the plan of that company, it may delay certain decision making. Now you need to get on board all the management ideas before certain decisions could have been taken, and these are some of the negativity of planning. Planning, as we said, it's ensuring that goals comes to light. And to understand goals, we also need to understand certain features about goals, to understand how goals are being operated. So goals, we said, are the starting point of every planning process. Goals are basically the starting point of every planning process. And goals can also have, companies can have multiple goals. Companies can have multiple goals in terms of goals that are associated with the top managers, goals that are associated with the middle managers or the lower managers. And we can also talk about the fact that goals focus on different goals. The focus of goals differ from different goals pertaining to different aspects of an organization. So the different aspects of organization may differ in terms of the goals that are related to finance, the goals that are related to environment, the goals that are related to other marketing, and everybody will have a different goals. And we are saying that the focus of goals differ because different goals pertain to different aspects of an organization. And one interesting thing about goals is that it is time bound, and this time bound in the sense that it can be a short-term goal, it can be a medium or intermediate term, or it can be a long-term goal. And goals also, as we say, can also be public or not public. Goals can be public or not public. So basically, official goals are formally and publicly declared. So with official goals, they are formally and publicly declared. It is in reports, and people tend to know the goals of a business. Now, when you talk about maybe operative goals, now operative goals may be, these are private goals, and that one will be pertaining to individual companies, and they would want to, work towards achieving these goals and may not declare it publicly. So we continue in terms of understanding goals and plans. And once we've been able to discuss the nature of goals, we are also going to discuss the importance of goals. And this was basically straightforward. So goal provides guidance and agreement on the direction of the organization. It gives guidance and agreement on the direction of an organization. The goals also facilitate effective planning. If you want to ensure that the company is well managed or well planned, then goals, you need to set up goals because it ensures effective management and effective planning. Then goals can also inspire and motivate employees. Now, when employees get to know the vision and the motive for the business, they are inspired and they work towards achieving those goals. So goals also provide a basis for effective evaluation of employees and organizational performance. So once goals are being established, one thing is that employees tend to appreciate. They tend to appreciate, and with that goal, that if you need every employee to produce 50, you can use it to evaluate their performances. Are their workers doing well? Are they not doing well? Are you achieving the goal that has been set for you? If not, then companies and leaders need to motivate you as to how to motivate your employees to get there. If you are going beyond, then maybe you are good for the business, and even if there's a situation of cutoff or unemployment situation, or the company wants to do redundancy, you will be safe because your in terms of your output level is higher than even what the company has targeted. So goals provide a basis for effective evaluation of employees in an organizational performance. So what are the criteria to achieve effective goals? And the criteria for achieving effective goals have been summarized in these 5 main concepts, basically what we call SMART. So S-M-A-R-T, SMART. So that is the S for specific, M for measurable, A for attainable, R for relevant, and T for time bound. So goal, as we are saying, it should be specific. Your goal should be specific, and it should be desired. It should be desired. People tend to know that, oh, this is what the vision is. It is a specific goal, and people can relate to themselves also to this goal. It's specific. They can relate themselves to this goal. And when the goal is attained, one important thing is that how do you evaluate these goals? How do you evaluate the goals? And in terms of evaluating these goals is, well, how do you measure them? How do you assure? How do you quantify them? How do you ensure that the goals can be attained? So once you specify the goals, which people are familiar with, they work towards it, and there should be a system in place to ensure that whatever is being said can be measurable. People can, measure it in the next 10 years, in the next 5 years. This is what we want to achieve. Have we achieved it at a particular period? Do you want, or even for example, in terms of market share, you want to increase your market size from 5% market to maybe 10%. Have you been able to achieve those levels in terms of the market environment? We can also talk about the attainable. Goals should be attainable. When you talk of goals being attainable, it means that it is realistic. People can achieve it. People can, because people sometimes set certain goals that are not within the confines of the business. Oh, we want the business to be the best in the whole world. You know that some business goals cannot be attained, basically, but you should know that when you are setting a goal, it should be attainable, it should be realistic in the eyes of the people in charge. And it should also be relevant. It should be relevant. And when talk of relevant in terms of the missions, the goals, and the strategic goals, it should be relevant in that sense. The goals should be relevant. It should be consistent and compactable. It should be persistent and compatible. We can also talk about the fact that it should be time bound. I mean, one interesting thing about goal is that it should be time bound. It should be time bound. In the next 10 years, what do I intend to achieve? And because something that will be relevant in the next 2 years or even a year, and you set a goal to achieve, in the following year may not be relevant. So it should be time bound. And when you are time bound, it helps you. So it helps you to know that whether your goal has been achieved or within the specific time, in 1 minute, how many goods can you produce? So this is one criteria for, these are the criteria for effective goals. So a goal setting technique. One important goal setting technique is what we call the management by objectives. And when we talk of management by objective, it's a technique to achieve integration of individual and organizational goals. So basically, management by objective is a system by which managers and employees define goals for every department, projects, persons, and use them to monitor subsequent performance. So it's a form of trying to integrate, like management and having an integration between the goal of an individual and the goal of an organization. Because when there's that kind of integration and understanding between these two units, because the organizational goals are different from individual goals. And when we're able to integrate these two, it helps the company to be better off. So what are the management by objective process? One ways you can do this is to initiate an initial discussion, and this one will basically help you to clear and give a good job description, and key performance areas of employees. So the interaction between a manager and employee should start with an initial discussion, and that is giving good description of the job and the employees. Another thing too is that we can establish potential key performance targets. So between this management process, they can establish key performance targets. And with this one, the manager and employee meets to develop a set of goals for the employee to which both are committed. So they set up goals for the employee, and in terms of key performance targets, the manager employee sit down, set up goals for the employee, and they ensure that these are being achieved. You can also talk about the fact that the employee and manager mutually establish checkpoints to measure employees' progress. So there are a whole lot of measuring employees' progress. Teachers are being monitored, lectures are being monitored between the employee, the university, and the staffs, how students are being asked to appraise the performances, and all these are forms of checkpoints to the employee. And another thing you can also talk about is the evaluation. And with evaluation, in terms of the goal attainment, basically this is predetermined period. So when you talk of evaluation, it focuses on the analysis of the achieved results compared with the predetermined goals. So you always have to evaluate was what the goal that you guys set, were you guys able to attain, and when you are able to attain, then which means that you've made a good point. If you go below that goal, which means that you have shot for and there's more room to be done. Okay, so now that we've discussed the goals, we are also going to go through the same process with the planning. We're going to understand what plans are. Now, plans. So there's an interesting statement that talks about the fact that if you don't know where you are going, you go everywhere. That's an important African statement. And also a very important statement is that if you fail to plan, then you are planning to fail. So planning is a very important, blueprint in terms of goal achievement. It gives you a blueprint so that you achieve your goal. And if you want to talk about planning, there are a whole lot of issues that we can talk about. And the issue about planning is that if you are planning, if you are setting a blueprint, you don't just set one plan, but you need to have other alternative plans. And with these other alternative plans, you now need to compare this in between. Should I move from Cape Town to Johannesburg? Should I pass through, if I'm moving from Cape Town to Durban, should I pass through Johannesburg, or I should pass through a different route? I mean, all this is a plan so that you know what strategy. And once you know this various alternative plans, somebody would want to go by flight, somebody would want to go by road, somebody would want to go by bicycle, which I don't know if, anybody will want to try that. Somebody will want to walk, which I also doubt. Somebody will want to use motorcycle. So all these are form of plan. I want to get to my destination. How do I go by? And if in terms of going by all these alternative plans, what is the importance? What are the strengths and weaknesses in terms of me going by a road, me going by flight, maybe flight in terms of time saving, road in terms of cost, in terms of, so you need to assess the strength and weaknesses and the cost, and from all these strength and weaknesses, from all these alternative choices, you therefore decide and make the best choice that will help the business grow. So that's what we are saying, that planning gives a print which you follow. You make sure that you don't just have a single plan, but you have alternative plan, because sometimes one plan that you set in motion becomes good at a certain point, and now becomes not useful. Now you need to readjust that plan with a new set. So once you have alternative plans, those can come in and can help you facilitate. Sometimes something happened. Maybe you are trying to go by flight, and then the weather condition was not good. So you want to change your plans to go by road or other means. So planning, as we're saying, is an important thing, that it helps businesses to become success. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Okay, so we continue with the planning process. And in terms of the planning process, we need to understand planning context. And we have 5 main important variables that we need to look at. We can talk about the purpose, we can talk about the mission statement, we can talk about the environment, we can talk about the values, and we can talk about the experience of management. Now, the purpose of organization basically includes providing safe products. So one of the planning process is that you must understand the purpose of an organization, and the purpose of this organization. What is your obligation or responsibility to society? And basically, as a business, your responsibility to society is to ensure safe products and reasonable prices, and combination of these factors ensures that businesses, are well planned or thought through. So another important organizational planning variable is the mission statement. And when you talk of the mission statement, basically you set out a unique purpose that distinguishes the organization from other organizations. So you set up a unique purpose. Your mission statement is your unique purpose. What is the company about? And that distinguishes it from other types of organization. Then the mission statement basically is derived from the vision and the goal setting and planning in the organization. That is one thing that you should know about this. We can also talk about the environment. And as we have discussed several times, that the business needs the environment to grow. So if you're planning, in terms of your planning, an important variable you cannot do away with is the environment in which the business operates. And there should be some form of balance between the two. Then you can also talk about the values. So values basically helps to cement the organizational culture, the strategy, and the structure. So they also determine the organizational commitment to social responsibility. That is one thing that we should know about values. The values of the managers. It shows the commitment to social responsibility, and it shows the commitment to social responsibility. We can also talk about the experience of management. It's very, very important because it influences performance of management. So the experience of management, it influences the performance of management. And these are important variables that we cannot ignore. So just as we have discussed the fact that we have different levels, the top level, the middle level, and the lower level, planning is an interactive process, or it's also a process. And then this process, basically, that's what we are discussing in this section. So how, if you are planning, what are you supposed to do? First of all, you need to establish a goal. If you are going to Cape Town, or if you are moving from Cape Town to Joburg, or from Joburg to moving from Cape Town to Pietermaritzburg, which route should you go through? Then you have to establish a goal, and you develop alternative plans. I've talked about this. So you develop an alternative plan. If my route is to go by flight, what are the alternative plans? Should I use car? Should I use a motorcycle? These are alternative plans. And then you evaluate the alternative plans. If I go by road, what are the pros, what are the cons, what are the good side, what are the bad side? If I go by flights, what are the good side, what are the bad side? You have to evaluate these plans. Then through the evaluation, you now need to select a plan. Oh, so this going by flight, maybe I need to attend a meeting at this time, and this flight will be the best means or the best safe and cost effective, and also in terms of the thing I want to do. Maybe you just want to enjoy certain environmental and road trip, so you would want to go for a road trip than the flight. So you then select a plan, and once you select a plan, you intend to implement, and with that, after implementing the plan, you also need to perform reactive planning if necessary. So you need to perform a reactive planning if necessary. When there's a change in the environment, this reactive plan will be there. It's very necessary because it helps you to make sure that you change a plan, maybe something that happened. So why don't you have change of plan? So that's what we are calling the reactive planning. That is something that happens. So you change plan and travel either by sea other than by air or another thing. So this is how the planning process are basically interrelated. So we talk about the goal setting, we talk about developing the plans, and that is choosing between the alternative, and talk about its implementation. And when it is being implemented, there should be a reactive planning. So the reactive planning is that you have another strategy which will change the focus of the plan, and all these are interrelated. All these are interrelated. So in terms of our discussion, which we've talked about different levels of the process, we should know that we have different kinds of types of planning. And this time we are delimiting ourselves to the strategic planning, the functional planning, and the operational planning. So The strategic plan is basically planning that are associated with the long-term goals, and basically those who in charge of the long-term goals are the top management. So they basically set up the mission and the long-term goals. Then we can also talk about tactical planning, and the tactical planning is basically they are the planning that focus on the medium term or the functional form, and these are by the middle management. And the short-term goals and the short-term planning, or what we call the operational planning. So these are the operations that are the operation, the day-to-day operations of the business. So these are the three types of planning. We are going to take these three types of planning and we are going to discuss them. So with the three levels of planning, now we are going to, analyze them, the three levels of this in terms of the top managers and middle and short or the low level managers. We are looking at their strategic planning and goals. So when talk of the goals, basically includes the vision, the mission, and the long-term goals. Now, when you talk of the vision, managers consider new possibilities to carry the organization into the future. How would you want the business to thrive in the future? Then in terms of the mission statement, this basically spells out the main goals of the organization. What is our objective? How do we intend to execute our objective? And they also formulate what we call the long-term goals. So the long-term strategic goals basically form the mission statement and the vision. Then they tend to, formulate an idea as to how do they want to achieve a higher form of profitability, how do they ensure they are highly productive, how they position themselves to be more competitive, and in terms of get a good human resource, human relations, technological leadership, and social responsibility. So in terms of the strategic goals, basically, we talk about the issues of vision, the mission, and the long-term goals. We can also talk about the strategic plans. So with strategic plans, basically focus on the organization as a whole over a period. So in terms of a period, now you set up a target. So in the next 5 years, what are the strategies? What are the plans? And we have two levels of strategies. It can be a generic strategy or a grand strategy. So grand strategies basically focus on the scope of an organization and how resources are used. So it focuses on the scope of an organization and how resources are used. And if you talk about the generic strategies, they basically determine how best to compete in a particular industry or market. So if we are belonging to a particular group, if we are in a telecommunication, we know how to compete. How do you use strategies or what strategic plan should you use to compete and for business to strive? So I want to continue with this section now. In terms of corporate strategy or the grand strategy, basically it determines whether an organization wants to expand its present businesses or start a new businesses. And with this one, we can talk about issues of what you call the internal and external growth strategies. And also with this form of business, it also reduces operation by selling or closing part of its business. And this is what we call the turnaround or decline strategy, or use corporate combination strategies. So some of the examples under the corporate growth strategies, we can talk about the corporate growth strategies. Here we can talk about the market development. That is when organizations plan to how do they develop their markets, develop an existing market, or how to get into a new market. You can also talk about product development. So you know that in terms of planning, most companies are thinking about how to improve upon the product they are doing. So sometimes the product, sometimes they take certain ingredients from the product that they sell to the market, or they make sure that it is more environmental friendly, or they are using some new ways of developing their product. You can also talk about the concentration growth. And with this one, it talks about the resources and the skills in terms of achieving profitability. We can talk about innovations. So under the internal growth strategies. So under the corporate growth strategies, we can talk about the internal growth strategies, which I've just mentioned some of them: the market development, product concentration, and innovation. We can also talk about the external growth strategies. Now, with external growth strategies, we can talk about the internal integration. So we can have an horizontal integration, and basically implies the organization takes over an organization similar to it. So integration, like with a similar company, try to integrate yourself with that one. Or we can also talk about the backward or vertical integration strategy. You move closer to source of supply by acquiring an organization or organization that supplies it with critical resources. So that is one thing about the backward vertical integration. You can also talk about the forward vertical integration, basically which involves acquisition of a business closer to the end consumer. So when you position a business close to the consumer, we call it the forward vertical integration. We can also talk about diversification. And diversification basically follow when it acquires other organizations to enter into new activities. So a business, maybe if you're producing water, you want to add drink, so you're diversifying the business. You're engaging in other related form of business in the same, maybe even in the drink industry, wine industry, you are doing, or even chocolate industry, you're doing Cadbury, you're doing Golden Tree, you're doing different types of chocolates. Okay, so we can also talk about another important strategy is corporate combination strategy. So under corporate growth strategies, which I'm discussing here, we can talk about the corporate combination strategy. And under corporate combination strategy, these are important things that we hear in the business world. So try to understand it better. So we can talk about a merger. So a merger takes place when two or more organizations put their resources to form a new organization. So two or more company, maybe Tigo and MTN join. No, this is not a joint. So they put their resources together and maybe form a new company. Then they will call it their merging. They are trying to, their resources, their staffs and everything tends to become one unit, or they will call it a merger. And sometimes we call it, we can also, another form of corporate organization is acquisition. So unlike two companies which agrees to come together in terms of merge, acquisition here, when a company tends to acquire another company or buy some shares or buy some part of that other company organization. So that kind of situation is what we call the acquisition. Then we can also talk about joint venture. And in joint venture, when two or more companies use some of their resources to form a separate new business in which both share ownership. So when both share ownership, then we call it a joint venture. Now, other strategies that under the corporate growth strategy that I'm talking about, we can also talk about the turn around or decline strategy, and turn around, organizational turnaround. We can also talk about the asset reduction or harvesting strategy. We can also talk about the divestiture, and basically this is a strategy that involves selling of a business or part of it in line with its mission. It is part of the vision of the business to sell some parts of it. You can also talk about liquidation, and here with the liquidation, it's a strategy which basically you want to keep shareholders to the minimum level of losses. So with liquidation, you don't want those who invest their money in, you get them protected. So these are some of the growth strategies. We can also talk about the discovery growth strategy. We can talk about the differentiation. And these are all forms of business ideas, or all forms of growth ideas that underlining the corporate growth strategy. So as we are saying that we have different kinds of strategies, and these different kinds of strategy, we have talked about the the corporate strategy, and we have talked about the general strategy. So under the corporate strategy is what I've talked about, the internal growth strategies. I've listed some points, the external growth strategies, the corporate combinations, the turnaround strategies. So as we've talked about the strategic goals and plans, we're also going to talk about the tactical goals and plans. And this is basically, as we said, concerning with the second or the middle management strategy. That is what the middle managers are about. So they have they take into consideration the functional goals or the functional plans. So what is a tactical goal? Basically, as we are saying, these are the goals that are derived from the long-term goals, and they are concerned with the medium-term and short-term goals. So they are concerned with the medium-term and short-term goals. You want to increase. So long-term goals, basically, which is the strategic plan, actually look for the next 5 years. But a tactical goal basically look out for what should be done, what we need to do, and what we need to do basically deals with the tactics. How do you ensure that you increase your market size in the business? Currently in the market, you are just, having a 5% share in terms of how you produce and do everything. But in terms of your tactical goal, you give a guideline as to how to increase your share from maybe 10% to 20%. And the tactical plans more specific focus, and it deals with the people's and action. And one thing that we should know about this tactical plans and the functional plans is that it also relates to the various functional markets. Remember, we talked about earlier. So in terms of the marketing, the finance, the production, all of them have certain tactical roles that they play. So in terms of marketing, you can talk about, they may focus on the product line, their market position, and how to increase the finance. We want to increase the financial stance of the business by looking at the debtors, the dividends, the assets, and they provide tactical guidelines as to how to ensure that these plans and these ideas and come to play. You can also talk about the human resource, the procurement, the research and development, the public relation information. All of these different functional forms have certain tactical plans and goals, and they work in terms of achieving these plans and goals. So now we talk about the last form of the planning process, that is the organizational goals and plan. Operational goals and plan. Now, as we said, this is basically by the low-level managers and developed by the low level or the middle level. But in terms of the operational goals, these short-term goals no longer more than 1 year. So basically, these are in the daily activities of the business. What are the goals that need to be achieved daily? What do you need? What do you need? You have to work for an average of 8 hours a day. What can you achieve in that particular day? What tasks is given to an individual, and how do they achieve those short-term goals? So in terms of achieving the short-term goals are the operational plans. The short-term plans purposive to achieve operational plans. There are two important forms of plans. There are two important forms of plans, and we can talk about a single-use plan. And basically, the single-use plans are developed to achieve a set of goals that are not likely to be repeated in the future. So if you set up certain goals and you are not going to use them or achieve them in the future, that is what we call the single-use plan. What are some of the single-use plan? We can talk about a program. So if maybe you are undertaking a one-time organizational goal or a program, for example, you want to build a new office block. It's a one-time goal and a single time that when it gets achieved, you don't need to, build another office building again. You can talk about a project. So for example, maybe there is, you set up a project to refurnish the whole office chairs. Once you are done, it's a single use plan. It's an operational plan, which is a single use plan. You can talk about a budget. So a budget that have been utilized for maybe a particular period of time for a particular project or a year that the company wants to focus on or follow. That budget becomes redundant or will not be useful once it is done. So the other form of plan is what you call the standing plan. And when we talk of the standing plan, basically they are the ongoing plans that provide direction for tasks that perform repeatedly in an organization. So they are the ongoing plans that provide direction for tasks that are performed repeatedly in an organization. So you can talk about the policies, the rules, and the standard procedure. These are all forms of standing plans. So what are the policies? Policies are basically the broad goals or the scope that derive from an organizational overall goals. So when talk of policies, boundaries for decision making, these are what carry decision making, decision making process, that is policy. The ideas, oh, we should do this, it's a policy. If you do this, this is what we are going to do. So that decision making, most of the first line managers, so that what they do, they take. We can also talk about the rule. And the rule is a statement that prescribes the employees what to do, what to do and may not want to do in a specific situation. So these are some form of standing plans. You can also talk about the standard procedures. And standard procedures are the methods defined to precise series of steps for attaining certain goals. So they are methods defined, they are methods, the standard procedures and methods. Basically, what they do is that they define a series of steps for attaining certain goals. So this is at the standard process, move from A to B, and this one helps you to attain certain goals. Now, once plan have been understanding the concept of planning, then one thing is that you need to execute, you need to implement these plans. And in executing or implementation of plans, you need to develop a framework for execution. You need to leadership to set the plan in motion. So you need the leadership to set the plan in motion. You need to control to determine performances, and you need a reactive planning may be necessary. So as we said, these are basically the planning process. And now that you're understanding the plans and the goals of a vision and how to go about it, we are now, our next discussion, we are going to focus on the organization. We are going to focus on the organization. So once you understand this, how do you execute is basically the organization, and how do you lead is the leadership. How do you control is to determine the performances. And as we said, in terms of every planning, there should be a reactive planning. Maybe always necessary that when the plan doesn't go as planned, how do you go and change the status quo, and how do you reset the situation? So in this section, I tried to be a little bit brief, and basically the whole of this chapter was to discuss what planning is, the planning process, how goals and plans, are related, and how basically are moving and how they can be achieved. I've also discussed about the three levels in terms of the top managers, the middle managers, and the low-level managers, because the top managers are for the strategic, basically the long-term, the tactical for the medium, and the operational for the day-to-day plans and goals. We have also talked about the long-term, medium-term, and the short-term planning of a business. So thank you for your attention.